All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. We are inside Radio Row in Las Vegas for the Super Bowl. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick. I am still wearing makeup. Drew Dinsick is not wearing makeup yet. Our guest, Rufus Peabody, also not wearing makeup at this stage, not yet anyway. Rufus, thanks very much for joining us. We'll get into the questions and everything, but how are you liking Vegas so far?
I know it pretty well and I like it, and I wish I got makeup.
Yeah.
Back from my ESPN days, I really enjoyed that. I was like, my face looks flawless.
Yes. The funny thing for me with makeup now is that when I go out for dinner with my wife, I feel compelled to have makeup on because she's putting makeup on. I spend my whole day wearing makeup because I'm on TV most days, but I don't. But I feel that I should. So now there's like two J's, and now I just never feel comfortable unless I'm not wearing makeup. Anyway, let's get stuck into it. Rufus, I want to ask you about, obviously, about the Super Bowl. You are, I should say, professional bettor, founder of Unabated Sports, which I use a lot, co-host of Bet the Process as well. We can talk about that. But just in terms of betting the Super Bowl, how has that changed, over your course as a bettor in terms of, do you think the pricing efficiency has gotten better? How's the limits landscape changed? All of that.
I think the whole ecosystem has changed with legalization in the United States. Back in the day, most of our effort was spent betting the openers. So you had books that were pricing these props, and they would be doing it once a year. So a prop like, will there be a roughing the passer penalty, was available once a year. The win would open it minus 115 to the no every single year. And every single year we bet it to minus 200. And so for us, it was a race to beat the other professional betting groups to these numbers. And so that was most of the action, whereas now a lot of these props are priced or offered by books every single week. And so the pricing is a lot more efficient. Obviously, if you're getting that kind of feedback every single week, you're going to be better at pricing it. And so we've sort of switched to betting more the weekend and the day of the game, just because you still have inefficiencies then, because the public is driving up these prices. And I think this year in particular, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, given that the Super Bowl is here in Las Vegas, if there is more recreational money driving the Kelsey receiving yards props up, the McCaffrey rushing yards props up, right? And I'm hoping to be able to really get some juicy unders on game day.
Okay, so you're pulling for like Rams Patriots type of a game state.
That's always great.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So as far as your process goes, can you shed a little bit of light on how you treat a game like this, where you have a team coming in with the Chiefs who have put together an uninspiring campaign in terms of offensive efficiency and success over the balance of the year, but they do have the more experienced coach and quarterback. Does that kind of complicate how you would particularly price a game like this up against a team that may be more talented but certainly less experienced?
Honestly, not especially. So I treat the side and total markets as if they're pretty efficient. Okay. And so when people ask me, do I consider a particular game narrative, I consider the possibility of narratives that could happen with a spread of -2 and a total of 47.5.
Yep. I think that is something that, a lot of bettors who, like the main stuff that I'm betting are futures and awards and, softer markets. And I think that sometimes a lot of people, frankly, they spend too much time on trying to figure out, like, are the Jacksonville Jaguars good at football? It's like, we've got the answer here right for us in a fairly efficient market. But I want to talk a bit more about player prop markets and, like, finding efficiency, because I think that, like, if you have a bad line or total as an opener, it will find efficiency by close. But with player props, I think it's a kind of a unique market-making process where, I think back to week 2, Christian McCaffrey, I believe against the Rams, he opened at 66.5 rushing yards in the market. Wow. And I thought that was just completely insane, and that it should be genuinely 20 yards higher. But for a week 2 NFL game, you're often not going to get a prop that is going to be able to find efficiency if it opens 20 yards too low, because everyone maxes out 66.5, then 67, then 68, and then all of a sudden everyone has kind of had their fill and people will stop pushing it. But, like, how do you find that? Do you find the prop market has gotten any more efficient?
So I think it has gotten more efficient, but I do think there are big inefficiencies, and I think there's a lot of overreactions. So last week we were able to bet Lamar Jackson rushing yards under 69.5, under 68.5, all the way down to like under 65.5 is what we took. The week before, his number was in the high to mid 40s. So that's a huge overreaction to one game.
Yep.
Now, I think what you tend to see with the Super Bowl, though, is you will see the initial moves when the lines come out are going to be sharp moves. And so something will like maybe open 71.5, get bet down to 65.5 or something like that. And then there's kind of a lull. Like right now we're in that lull period. But as we get closer to the weekend, you're going to start seeing more public action trickle in because, let's face it, I mean, recreational bettors are not betting on this stuff a week and a half before the game. And so you're going to see the lines continue to creep up and up and up, and then game day, it's going to be pretty unpredictable. But you could see lines pretty much shoot up here, especially in Nevada. More so Nevada than elsewhere because you have unique books here. You have Superbooks in a few other states, South Point, Circa's in a few states, and so they're trying to manage their liability, and they don't want to have, I mean, they know they're going to be taking lots of Kelsey bets, lots of McCaffrey bets, but they'd rather actually move the price a little bit rather than just say let's just have a big decision, and so it's going to be really interesting to see like which guys get bet up, and so it's a unique game in the fact that the closing line is oftentimes less efficient than the opening line for these player props.
Okay, so fade the late creep as there's a little bit of push into some of these player prop markets is a fun kind of angle I haven't really thought about. I am almost strictly sticking to sides in NFL nowadays, a little bit of totals, and very little props, very light props for me. So, and I've always kind of had respect for how difficult it is to come up with fares for props on a Super Bowl when you're not doing it week in, week out. And I think your points are extremely fair of like if the bookmakers have to now think about these every week for same game parlay type of kind of markets, then yeah, of course they're not going to open as soft. That said, I would have lost a bet on how liquid some of these player prop markets are in terms of how much you can get down, how many times you can rebet, and where you can, the kind of feeding frenzy for, all of these legal outs to try to, generate the handle on this sort of stuff. Like, has this caught you by surprise? Do you think we are on an uptrend here where this continues to grow? And, I guess is this just kind of, found money for someone like you?
Well, what's funny is that the Westgate, I was there on last Thursday when they had their sort of prop release night, and I asked Jay Cornegay, I was like, when are we going to get an inflation adjustment to these limits? Because it's been $2,000 since I moved out to Vegas in 2008. So, but I will say, you're right, at most places like game day, when books have taken two-sided action, they're going to up those limits. I mean, circa last year, you saw $10,000 limits for certain props. And so, I mean, they feel comfortable with their number at that point and are willing to take action.
Yep. How are you calculating player injuries into kind of prop adjustments with things like, not so much like, if a quarterback goes down, okay, there's a lot of, even publicly available data on what the drop-off is from Kirk Cousins down to Josh Dobbs and so forth. But when Joe Tooney goes down, and it looks like, everyone keeps saying he has a significant pec injury and he's a chance to play. I'm pretty sure a significant pec injury, he has a torn pectoral muscle, which is usually like 6 months out or something. I don't think he's going to play.
Sure.
So how do you factor in like how that affects Isaiah Pacheco and his rushing ability and the Chiefs' offense in general? Because it is it's difficult to quantify a single offensive lineman's impact.
It is, and that's not my strength, to be honest. I might make a small manual adjustment. But the one interesting thing with handicapping props is thinking about in-game injuries. So McCaffrey, I expect to be on the field basically every play unless he bonks his head again, or he needs a breather or he gets injured. I think that the 49ers have been saving him and managing his workload all season so that he can play every single play. Now, what happens if he gets injured? What's the probability that he gets injured? Like, I make his rushing yards mean total, I think, 101 yards, which is higher than the market. But that's assuming that he plays the full game, and the median's going to be a little bit lower also. But if he has a 9% chance of getting injured, which is I think what I have it estimated at, there's a very good chance that's not a very good chance he gets injured, but that creates a whole different set of circumstances in which case, you could see him only have 30 rushing yards or something. And so, and think about how that affects Elijah Mitchell.
Sure.
So basically what I have is like, I run these simulations with this probability of injury, and I say, okay, 9% chance he gets injured. If he gets injured, it could be simulate where he gets injured. Any point in the game, just even uniform distribution. And then I have a projection for Elijah Mitchell that basically says if he was playing the whole game, this is what he would be. And so then, in that case, he gets injured, Mitchell gets those carries. And so I think that's a challenge, though. It's because I have no idea what the true injury probabilities are. And then when you think about like Deebo Samuel, who's someone who's very injury prone.
He's got to be the highest you've ever priced for a game like this. Right?
Oh, yeah. And then you have Juwan Jennings, who doesn't see that much involvement or snaps with both those guys are healthy with Samuel and Ayuk, but if one of those guys goes down, he's suddenly a major player. And so I think it creates some interesting opportunities, especially for like alternate props, which now you see a lot more of those at the domestic sportsbooks outside of Nevada.
Is there anything? Do you think that matchup effects and perceived strengths and weaknesses tend to be overvalued a little bit in that a lot of what we talk about and a lot of what all the people here are going to talk about is that the Niners have a very below average rushing defense, and so everyone is thinks that Isaiah Pacheco is going to have a good game, and that's what I think Isaiah Pacheco will have a good game because they have a bad rushing defense, but they can also just put an eighth man in the box, and then all of a sudden that gets mitigated. And also the Ravens had the best rushing offense in football, and their running backs ran the ball 6 times, and obviously a lot of this matchup stuff in football gets swallowed up by game script. Do you think it gets a little overrated?
I do, and in a way, when I'm handicapping props, what I'm trying to do is the same thing as what coaches are trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what the teams are going to do, what their game plans are going to be. And so if everybody knew what the game plan would be, it would be a lot easier. But I think the whole point is these teams want to throw wrinkles that teams are not expecting. Yeah. So I think it's difficult, and I do think it does make the matchup things harder. But I will say it is interesting. There's certain coaches that stylistically, they're like, we're going to do what we do best. It doesn't matter who we're playing. Whereas there's other coaches who are going to throw some wrinkles at you. They're going to try to take away your best player. They're more malleable.
Yep. No, that makes sense. I got to ask you a personal question a little away from the game. So I tend to wind down my staking as we get to the end of the season just because I have sort of been trained or taught myself that hey, the deeper we go, the more efficient this market gets. So just, settle down, chill out. You don't want to be sweating through a Super Bowl like your year depends on it. And yet here, this has got to be probably one of the more liquid days of the year for you. Do you enjoy the Super Bowl? What do you do?
It is, and it has been pretty stressful for me over the years.
Sure.
Watching it isn't much fun. But so I don't bet as much NFL anymore. So It's definitely the biggest exposure I have on the NFL in one day.
Yeah.
But relative to all the other stuff I'm betting, the Super Bowl volume is going to not even be like 30% of our volume this week. So with college basketball, we'll have more in action on college basketball on Saturday than we will on props.
Wow. Yep. That's surprising.
Okay. All right. We're going to hit a little ad and then we'll follow up some more questions. If you want another sweat during Super Bowl week, Drew and I have you covered with a special edition of Bet the Edge on Thursday night. Join us on our NFL and NBC Sports YouTube channel at 9 p.m. Eastern for an NFL Awards live watch along and find out how we feel about the winners for Coach of the Year, Comeback Player, and much more. And you can watch a grown man cry if D'Amico Ryans or Damar Hamlin go down in those markets. I will wander off into the Vegas night, hopefully never to be seen again. Okay, more Super Bowl. Really interested, Rufus, in what you make of just the idea of Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, which I think that is a big part of everyone's perception of this game is that Purdy has looked fragile at times in these playoff games, and the Ravens game as well, which I think was kind of a playoff type of atmosphere, whereas Mahomes famously, raises his game to another level in the playoffs. I think a lot of that is just he avoids turnovers in the playoffs and has avoided turnover-worthy plays. And also with Mahomes too, there's this element that whenever he is a dog or less than a field goal favorite, he covers at a disproportionate rate. Do you think there actually is something material about Mahomes going to another level in these big games?
That's a really good question. I think if we knew the answer, it would be a lot easier, right? If that was the case, if we thought that was predictive, the market did, then you would see the Chiefs as the favorite here. But I think that's what we're all trying to predict. And I think the way to look at that is to look and see historically if there are other quarterbacks who've kind of done the same thing. And so that would be my approach to looking at it and sort of seeing if there's a distribution of how guys have done in clutch moments or in the playoffs or things like that relative to expectation overall, and if that tends to be predictive going forward. I have not run that analysis personally, but I do think that's a really good question.
Yeah, I don't mind chiming in and saying that, yes, it's a thing. It is. It just is. Alex Honnold is not the world's greatest free climber by accident. He has specific biology in his brain where he's not afraid. right? And if you are capable of being on that stage and performing at that level consistently, like it's just a thing. Like I don't mind kind of making that leap at all. That said, he's going to have to do it with some guys who don't necessarily have those genes in the wide receiving core for the Chiefs, which I think could kind of be one of the limiting factors in their offense overall. But I'm on the Niners, so I'm talking myself even more into that.
Wait, does he raise his game, or does he just not fold under the bright lights? That's the question. Because if he raises his game, then it's like, why doesn't he raise his game? You know, it's almost saying he's not 100%, going 100% the rest of the time.
I think the thing is that, well, a couple of things. One, I do think they ramp up the passing plays in the playoffs relative to regular season stuff, and I think that there is an element of, you know, calling the best plays with Andy Reid on that side. I think as well that I haven't tested this, but I think there is an idea as well that players like Mahomes and Josh Allen, who have a great scrambling ability, potentially can do that more so in the playoffs. Think back to the AFC title game last year. Mahomes effectively wins the game by, you know, sacrificing his body on the sideline and getting the roughing penalty. So I think that is an aspect of it too. As to whether that, like, a clutch gene and stuff, isn't there something with Novak Djokovic where on like key points, Novak Djokovic has this insane disproportionate win rate on key points?
No question.
Well, I mean, in tennis, as Drew knows, I think, you know, players are not playing all points equally.
Correct. Yeah.
If you're up a break in a set, you're going for quick points.
Yeah.
Like, think Pete Sampras back in the day.
Sure.
Yes.
But I think your point about Mahomes rushing and quarterbacks rushing more is very valid, and that does hold true in the data, and that's why you see Mahomes rushing props at like 28.5, 29.5 rushing yards, where if you look at his average this season, it's nowhere close to that. But he scrambles at a much higher rate than he does during the regular season, as do these other rushing quarterbacks, and I think, you know, there is no tomorrow. Like, they're going to sacrifice their body a little bit more.
Okay. Let me ask you a speculative question about the side market. Since this is, I'm just kind of curious if you have a sense of this. The Ravens last, AFC Championship game got bet aggressively. That number closed, what, 4.5? It was a pretty one-sided sharp move in favor of the Ravens.
Yeah, I was on the wrong side of that.
Yes, sure. Many were. Don't get me wrong. Chiefs were dogs against the Bills. That was less lopsided, but there was certainly some sharp Bills action in that market. Last year's Super Bowl, where I thought for sure the Chiefs were going to close favorites. There was plenty of support for the Eagles. Ultimately, do you think that there is any kind of hesitance or tendency for the market makers in these, in a market presumably this efficient? Like, are they just tired of fading Mahomes?
I think they're trying to draw pretty balanced action for the Super Bowl. I know, on a normal NFL Sunday game, they may have disproportionate action on one side, and it's not going to be a huge deal. But just given how much is bet on the Super Bowl, they actually do care more about balancing the action. And I think what you see a book like Circa do is really interesting, where they will move a number. If they're not getting a lot of action on one side, they move a number, and then maybe move it. If nobody's betting, move it further, just to sort of see, to gauge where people are and where there will be resistance, to sort of really have an idea of what that number is. I mean, you ask if the bookmakers are tired of Mahomes doing this, probably, but it actually really depends on what their exposure is.
Sure. No. Sure.
Do you bet same game parlays?
Sometimes. It's not a big focus of mine.
Yeah. So I do think that is, and look, there is I think a reticence for professional bettors or bettors in general who are trying to win to bet same game parlays, because books hold at 20 to 30% on same game parlays as opposed to your 4.7% on a minus 110 side. But I do think there are a lot more angles on the NFL with same game parlays than I would think any other sport, given that just the nature of the game is so variable, dependent on game state, in a way that baseball is not. Baseball, you are just, for the most part, trying to score or prevent runs. Whereas in football, the kind of the state that the game is in and teams abandoning or emphasizing the run or pass or key players, I think that there are ways to build stories around how a game will unfold at the tails that sometimes aren't captured. And also for same game parlays, limits tend to be much higher because their books are expected to hold at around 25%. And so is that something that you might explore going forward in terms of just given how variable it is dependent on game state?
First of all, I completely agree that though they are money printing machines for the books overall, there are huge vulnerabilities. And if you think about how they're priced, so to price these well, you can't do it with just a model. You need to run simulations of these games, and so it really depends on how good that simulation engine and that process is, and if it is able to account for these different game states and the different dependencies on there. So when you're up against a model, you're up against a model, not a market, basically. Think about the things that would be really harder, to model. And I said there's no model, but it's the model that goes into the simulation engine, I guess I should say. And so I completely agree with your point that there are certain things in the tails that are going to be really, really hard for them to price out accurately. And so if you can find the sort of exceptions to the rule, I think there are huge opportunities there.
Yeah, stuff that is inverse correlation that is built in as being likely correlated, stuff like that. Is that what you're referring to?
There's certainly, right. If you think about like certain teams, overall a quarterback will be positively correlated with a wide receiver or something, or maybe a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2 might have. I don't even know what the correlation there is exactly, but there are certain. Actually, let's talk about I think running backs. Maybe there's one running back who only gets goal line carries, and so if he might have 1 carry for 1 yard and a touchdown, and so there's not going to be this huge correlation between his rush attempts and whether he scores a touchdown or his yards. So I mean, I think that there are exceptions to the sort of general rules, and if you can find those, as you said, Drew, I think that's a really good way to approach it.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the modeling behind same game parlays and behind tails and alternate spreads, it's just ultimately not that sophisticated at books. Like Drew and I were talking about this example where in terms of a team's alternate spreads, like if you are a team that is a 2-point favorite with a total of 47.5, then your alternate spread of minus 14.5 is going to be the same no matter what team you are, right? But I think there just has to be certain team profiles of strengths and weaknesses that lend themselves more to blowing teams out. And I haven't tested this, but I would think that if you have like the Niners and the Ravens do, where you have elite rushing offenses and much better pass defenses than rush defenses, then I think that you are just much more likely to blow teams out given the game state of playing with a lead than another team is that has a really poor pass defense, for instance. So that stuff like that is not taken into account whatsoever in pricing.
Well, think about Mahomes and all his comeback victories. Yeah. Like we have a spread of 2 and a total of 47.5. I would definitely argue that the Chiefs down 10 are going to be much more likely to come back than an average 2-point underdog.
No question. Even against a very good pass rush, because Mahomes is unsackable.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, I think back to, last Super Bowl, I think the Eagles were minus 400 at halftime, and it did not feel like a super steady minus 400 going up against Patrick Mahomes.
I agree with that.
Did you bet the Chiefs money line at the half?
No, because the other factor was that the final Chiefs offensive play, Mahomes limped off to the sideline with his ankle, and I think at that point, I'm basically betting on how effective the drugs going into Patrick Mahomes' ankle are. It's like a big part of the handicap. I also had a ton of Chiefs from prior to the game, which at that point I was just ready to write off into
I think
death.
this time last year I was beating the drum. Only time in our lives we're going to get to bet Pat Mahomes as a dog in the Super Bowl, so you got to make it worthwhile. And turns out not to be.
I need to find the trainers in this room. They have to be here somewhere, right?
I think so, yeah. That's going to be a big part of this. All right, one more read, then I got another question for you, Rufus. Join the party on the PGA Tour at TPC Scottsdale this week as Scotty Scheffler goes for his 3rd straight title at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. Check out all the big drives, hole outs, and rowdy fans on the 17th green on NBC Golf Channel, as well as Peacock, where you can stream the entire tournament. Scotty Scheffler, plus 450 favorite to win a golf tournament.
He's like the last man standing, right?
And you know what? You know what's crazy is I actually think there's a little bit of value there.
Yeah.
just a touch. But I hate taking favorites, but yeah.
It is like, I can't remember the stat exactly, but it's like 24 out of 25 tournaments Scotty Scheffler has finished in the top 12. Something of that.
He's so consistently good, and the thing is he's still underperforming on the greens.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really hard to do that well and be a below average putter.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be that good in all these other facets of your game and have been a good putter in the past and then putt this poorly. I kind of expect his putting to improve.
Yeah. If it does, then he's basically just Tiger Woods 2.0 and going off at plus 150 to win these types of tournaments. Last one for you from me, Rufus, is about golf. You had a great tweet about what happened at Pebble Beach with the tournament being called after 54 holes and bettors trying to take advantage of that when there was, some indication that might happen, but books left those markets up. Just wondering, do you think that, is there anything, I guess in a macro sense, that you would prefer books to be doing now that they're not doing?
Well, I think the big problem is just is a systemic one. It's the fact that they have all these different offerings, and they allow you to parlay basically everything which way. That they end up having these huge vulnerabilities when there are oversights. In this case, it was an oversight of a book to say, these markets are not valid live if the tournament, if 72 holes aren't completed. And so, people were parlaying everybody in the top 10 at the end of round 3, and you could get, I don't know, what was it, like $1 million to 1 odds, or almost?
No, it was like
I saw a ticket that was like $200, or it was $20 to win like almost $1 million. Right, like that's a huge issue on the sportsbook side, and I don't think it's just, if it hadn't happened here, it would happen somewhere else.
Of course, yeah.
Because while a tournament being called after 54 holes isn't normal, it's not unprecedented either. And so I just think that, I think in essence the foundation, you have a house that's built on a foundation that's a little bit, shaky. And so it's because, as you said, like these same game parlays are such money printing machines for these books. Yeah. It's easy to look the other way.
Yep,
sure. They've gotten away with some black swans.
It's
Chargers.
I don't even think
Raiders
this is a black
tie.
swan, right? But the thing is, there are going to be
yeah.
more of these things that happen. We don't know which things they're going to be. They are known unknowns.
Sure.
Yep. I think there just has to be an element of, one, I don't think that, and I agree with what you said in your tweet, where I don't think bettors should feel as though they were hugely wronged, because they knew everyone knew what they were doing.
No,
you were trying to get away with something, and you didn't get away with it. It's like, it's not like committing a crime and they're not expecting to get arrested, but there is an element where you have to know this is going to happen, and this is a palpable error in effect.
Sure.
I do think as well, though, that there has to be some level of accountability for a book, and I used to work at a book, and I remember that there was, after Kobe Bryant's death and what teams and players were doing, I can't remember, it was the following day where they're dribbling out the shot clock for 24 seconds to honor Kobe. And so then everyone starts hammering unders on first quarter totals and stuff, because they're basically getting a free possession. And like those markets were left up, like you have to honor those bets. Like there has to be some level of accountability. The issue is the level of accountability, it very much fluctuates based on how big the payout has to be, really.
Sure.
Right, and I think you need risk management practices in place so that so that there are safeguards against this. Whereas if alarm bells don't go off, if you suddenly have millions of dollars in exposure on this one thing, maybe that's an issue.
Yeah, no. Some of my favorite stories, some stories we were telling last night at dinner, are getting one over on the book. Like, it's very, very fun to kind of feel like, hey, I just got away with something. Like, this is fun. It's a fun story to tell. But in the end, like, you're not making those bets in good faith. You're shooting an angle, and it's when the power exists within the bookmakers, with the regulators, like, you're not going to get paid on that sort of stuff, and you shouldn't expect to. You should just consider it a fun tale you can tell your friends in 10 years.
So my question for you guys is, where do you draw that line?
Sure.
So I came up sports betting in Las Vegas. I worked for odds makers, Las Vegas sports consultants, a bunch of people that had been doing this for decades. Back in the days of the Stardust, being the opener for the world betting market. And so I kind of learned about betting is like the spirit of the game was kind of was the way I think about it. And so like past posting, betting after an event had started, if books left up a line, that wasn't in the spirit of the game. Finding kind of correlated parlays, that's in the spirit of the game. I don't know if my opinion is right or anything like this. This is just the way I view it, but where is that line?
I think it's a legal burden of proof type of thing, where if it's clear and obvious, then clear and obvious is the line. If you're betting on a slightly correlated parlay, if you're getting a one possession edge on an NBA first quarter team total, I don't think that is enough to warrant voiding bets. I think that if you're parlaying effectively known outcomes to win millions of dollars, then that is clear and obvious. I think that everything past posting, that books should be within their rights to void those, because those at that point they're not real bets. Like, they're just basically taking money out of an account. So I would just use the burden of proof of clear and obvious. And I guess that's grey, but I don't think there's a way to create a perfect environment.
You'll know it when you see it type of stuff. Yeah. That sounds about right.
Is there any way we can learn from this and have the ecosystem improve?
Well, yeah, obviously, like if you're, I mean, you should have risk management practices in place if you're a book that's taking same game parlays to where you know immediately, like, oh man, we've just taken 2 bets on the same, black swan. Like needs to get looked into. It needs to get voided immediately. Like, I'm surprised that it took as long as it did for them to take any action, and I'm surprised they wrote as many bets after the tournament was stopped. Like, effectively, after round 3 was over, like, why are you writing a single bet at that point?
Nobody must have been watching the golf coverage because Jim Nantz was talking about it like incessantly, and how like there's a chance that the tournament's called after 54 holes. So. Yeah.
I have to ask you one more golf question as long as we got you, because you are the preeminent golf originator that I know. The live guys, it's becoming an epidemic at this point where the PGA Tour feels like it's suffering a bit in terms of talent, but I understand what's happening very clearly in that if you go to the live tour, you are less likely to be subject to the physical fatigue that that the calendar for the PGA Tour puts you through, and gives you
why they're going to live
a little bit that and the money, but like you have a little bit higher likelihood, I think, of winning majors, and Masters is right around the corner. How do you view sort of the pool of contenders for the Masters in a way that and is it a fair fight between the guys who are sticking around on the PGA Tour versus the guys who are coming in via live?
You're saying live guys are less fatigued, so they have a better chance of winning majors?
That's my read. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna call bull on that narrative. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I would say it's more likely they're rusty from not playing as much. So.
Very interesting. Okay. I felt like there was a decent amount of overperformance from the live guys last year, and that's kind of helping, or at least seems to have kind of made a lot of people make additional decisions
I think that's
about moves.
So the thing is, I think that you had guys at the top do well, but overall they didn't overperform.
I wonder how much of that is just like Brooks Koepka cares way more about majors.
Okay.
He kind of skews
100%. Yeah. He's the Patrick Mahomes, huh?
He is the Patrick Mahomes.
Golf.
Yeah. He's also a fun, in a way, like a live betting candidate where it's like being able to get the first look at Brooks Koepka and see, is Brooks Koepka taking this tournament seriously or not?
Wait, speaking of live really quickly, did you know that for $10,000, you could play in the Pro-Am tomorrow?
Is that right?
I was considering it this morning until I realized I have too much work and there's no way I can do it.
It's going to be terrible.
Maybe I'll do that and shoot 112.
Like, this is worth it for networking.
Just wanted to touch on something you said previously, Rufus, about trading and risk management systems at books. Like, I think a lot of people who don't work in the industry, they don't realize that a lot of these bookmakers, like legal bookmakers in the US, they are primarily marketing and tech companies before they are trading houses. Yes. And when you look at like the salary structures of bookmakers, like trading and customer service, they sit at the bottom. Like a lot of books do not invest nearly as much into their trading risk management systems as they do their marketing spend, clearly, because you can kind of get by with having with limiting shops and just kind of reorienting your resources elsewhere to get higher value clients and not worry as much. And I think that is something that will hopefully change. And if that leads to more pricing efficiency and less edges, as long as that comes with higher limits and more confidence in your pricing and in your system, then I think that would be a net gain for everyone. Anyway, Rufus, anything that you'd like to plug? I know Unabated Sports, I recommend that everyone signs up. I use Unabated. It's great. It's an odd screen. I really enjoy the NFL season simulator tool as well, which is super useful.
I'm glad you like that. That was my favorite to build.
Yeah, that's a fun one. But anything else you want to plug?
No, first off, I actually use Unabated every day myself. I have the company is tools that I actually use myself. But also Bet the Process podcast, which I do with Jeff Ma, who is of MIT Blackjack fame.
Sure.
And it's a sports betting analytics podcast, and we talk to really interesting people.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rufus. Don't forget everyone to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks for those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. And if you're listening to us as a podcast, don't forget to rate and subscribe. And also a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. From Jay Croucher, Drew Dinsick, and Rufus Peabody. Thank you for listening. Drew and I will be back tomorrow from Radio Row.